I think everyone's really excited. We've had lots of questions submitted that we'll get into a little bit later on, and hopefully we'll get lots of questions submitted during our interview today as well. So exciting. So let's get straight into our first question, which is just so that the young people listening can get to know you a little bit better. Can you please tell us about your career journey and your current role?
Yeah, sure. So I'll try and give you a shortened version because it's really hot today and I don't want people falling asleep with me talking for ages. So my career journey, it really started off quite informally. So I grew up in Woolwich in southeast London, and I grew up, I was a teenager in the late 90s, early noughties. So this is around about the time that you had UK Garage was at its peak. And you had like UK rap, like the first versions of UK rap doing their thing. And all of my friends were rappers, or some were DJs and some were rappers. And I learned very, very quickly when I was rapping with my friends that I wasn't very good at rapping. and then I thought to myself, I'm not that great at rapping, so let me try DJing. And I realized that I was better at DJing than rapping, but I still wasn't as good at DJing as some of my friends who were DJs. So I was like, what can I do? And then what I realized was my skill, the thing that I tended to do when my friends were rapping, was I was quite good at putting things around them and analyzing how to make their little music videos better. Or how to and this is before the age of social media, but I had to go viral on the school playground or the college playground. So that's basically how I got my first steps into realizing that music might potentially be something that I wanted to do. But this was, I was going to school and college before Spotify, before Apple Music, before YouTube launched. I was graduating from secondary school 5 years before YouTube launched, which makes me feel mad old now, because most of you lot that are listening were probably born around the time YouTube launched. I was finishing school them times. So what happened was I finished school, went to college, and there was maybe 20 of us that started out rapping in secondary school, year 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. By the time we got to college and we were doing our A levels, that had turned to maybe only 3 or 4 that had carried on doing music. At the same time, I was one of the only people in my area and on my block that had access to a computer. So the landscape for like the average household 20 years ago was very different to how it is now. So not everybody had a laptop, not everybody had a mobile phone, but I was quite lucky. My mum, because of her work, she got given a computer in our house. So we had internet connection and we had a computer with all the software installed. So I basically just via Google taught myself how to use Photoshop, use Microsoft Office, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, etc. And I basically became the go-to person in the area for making CD covers, making mixtape artwork, doing posters, etc. So I was doing that on the side, and then to earn money, I was working in retail. My first ever job was working in Sainsbury's, stacking shelves. The skills that I learned to that day in Sainsbury's still apply now in terms of basic customer service, turning up on time, dealing with various people from different backgrounds, etc. So started off at Sainsbury's, left after 6 months. Then I went to House of Fraser in my local shopping centre, and started working there. So I was doing some retail jobs. And then I got a break working for a small what's called television production company. So the production company that basically film documentaries and dramas and events for TV. And my whole angle was, you know what, I'm just going to try and get my foot in the door in any which way. I don't care if it's music, I don't care if it's film, I don't care if it's fashion, just anything that's entertainment related, I'm going to try and get a job in. So, like I said, I had this side hustle on the ends of helping people out with their music careers, informally, just as a brethren. And then my formal experience was now transitioning into doing some work experience and work placements for this television production company. And what I found was I was trying to apply for internships and work placements at all of the big companies, MTV, ITV, BBC, Channel 4, Channel 5. And I was just getting knocked back because there were so many hundreds of thousands of people that were applying for these jobs. So I said to myself, all right, you know what? Let me look through the credits of TV shows and let me look at the smaller production companies that are working on these TV shows. They're not going to have as many people applying for these jobs. So let me go for the path of least resistance. So that's literally what I done. I had like my little, I don't even know how I done it back then, whether it was Sky Digital or whatever, but I literally was pausing the TV shows, looking at the production companies, Googling those production companies, and lo and behold, that strategy worked. I was getting loads of calls back from production companies. So anyway, got a job at a production company. That was an incredible experience. One thing led to another. Yeah, basically got my foot in the door in a couple of sort of bigger organizations. Switching back to the informal experience, I had one friend in particular who I went to primary school with, secondary school with, and college. And he had now gone from being like a block star to his music now starting to get played on like One Extra, he's starting to get played on MTV. So he's now kind of getting famous, not just in the area, but like across London and across England now. So it went from me just helping him out informally to being like, I'm kind of managing you in it. Like, I know we've not kind of said, oh, I'm your manager, but I'm doing everything for you. I'm booking shows. I'm turning up to meetings with you. Like, we might as well just make this a thing. So I basically started managing him. And through that, and through the opportunities that were coming his way, I was making my connections, because when One Extra were inviting him to the station, I was going in there with him, etc. So that's how I was building up my informal experience. So then what happened? What happened was, yeah, switching back to the formal side. So you can see here, there's a theme here of formal experience and informal experience all the way through. So this whole story is over the course of about 3 years so far, so 16 to 19 years old. And then a job came up for a company called Durrance, and Durrance is a media monitoring agency. Now, for those who don't know what a media monitoring agency is, because they don't really exist anymore, is before the days of Google News alerts, no one had any way to know what people were saying about them. So if you were Nike and you released a new tech fleece, or if you were Coca-Cola and you released a new flavor of your Coke or Fanta, you would pay a media monitoring company to basically watch the news and read the newspapers to look out for any mentions of Nike Tech Fleece or Coca-Cola. And the reason you're going to do that is to make sure that people are saying nice things about your product. What you don't want to do is release a new version of Coke and that's giving someone a heart attack, for example, and then some of the newspapers are writing loads of bad things about you. So yeah, I was working for this company called Durrance, and I was doing a job called media reading, where you've got a list of clients, you know, BBC, Coca-Cola, Microsoft, Netflix, and you basically are reading the news, and you have to mark out any words that match, you know, the client list that you've got. I was working there. It was by far the most boring job I've ever had in my life. It was mind-numbingly boring. But at the same time, again, I was learning lots of different companies. Then a job came up at the BBC, working in their marketing department. A big part of working in the marketing department, you had to be across current affairs and across the news. I was reading the news for a living. Every single day I was coming in and reading the news. So I was building up some formal experience. I applied for the job. I got it. It was working for a radio station called Radio 4 and Radio 5 Live, which is a speech station that do like news and sports. Was there for about 6 months, and then a job came up at One Extra. I didn't have any formal music experience whatsoever, but I had all of this informal experience that I had from helping out my friend in the background. and I used that to blag my way into BBC One Extra, and that's how my career started. So that's the kind of semi-long version of my career to One Extra. Went from One Extra, was working in radio. That was an incredible experience. Moved from One Extra to Spotify. Probably most people who have come across my journey probably know me from Spotify onwards, where I was able to do some amazing things, launch playlist brands, and help turn Spotify into the #1 music brand in the world at the time. Went from there to Apple Music, working for Apple, the world's most successful company. Again, incredible experience. And then 2 years ago, I joined Atlantic Records as executive vice president. What I do day to day is I basically wake up in the morning, I listen to music, and then I argue with people about music all day. That's basically what my job is. At Atlantic Records, we sign artists. So we take artists and we sign them, we partner with them, we make music with them, we help develop them, and then we market them. So we A&R and we market is basically the simplest way to describe it. And I oversee the entire Black music infrastructure that does that. And then the second part of my job is to make sure that from a digital point of view and a streaming point of view, Atlantic Records stays the #1 label in the UK. So I hope I haven't spoken too much and bored you guys, but that's basically my career to date and what I do day to day.
No, I think that's been really interesting, and I like how you showed that informal stuff and how that sometimes can be just as important as your actual job that pays you, and doing that extra bit on the side can really pay off, like it did for you. So great to hear about that and that experience for you. Our next question, and I'm sure you have some great ones, is what have been some of your career highlights?
Oh, wow. What have been some of my career highlights? You know what? Like, I got into this industry to help change my life, but also help change the people around me's lives as well. And in the same way that like an artist, whether they be a singer, a producer, or a rapper, their whole thing is if I can get on, then I can bring everyone with me. My thing was the same, but just instead of being in front of the camera, I just said, let me try and have a level of influence behind the camera, and I can bring my kind of my area, my ends, my friends, my family with me. So for me, it's really been like it's the moments when you've seen someone grow from that very first meeting to seeing them like headlining Glastonbury or headlining the O2 Arena. Do you know what I mean? Like they're quite special moments. I think if I look at Tion Wayne, for example, is a really good example of like seeing him go from like being a street superstar and a hood superstar to seeing him on the main stage at Wireless. And that moment where like we handed him the #1 plaque, do you know what I mean? Like that was incredible when we handed him the #1 trophy for Body. In fact, I've got, if you just stay there 1 second, I've actually got it here. This is the trophy that we handed to Tion Wayne. This is an official charts company #1 trophy. And yeah, being able to like hand that to him was an incredible moment. So they're really the moments. What are the other things I've been really proud of? I was the first person in the world to playlist Ed Sheeran, and that was incredible. So before Ed Sheeran was the international global star that we know him as today, he was just a really, really, really talented independent artist. And he signed a I think it was an EP deal with Atlantic Records, but no one was tipping him. And when I was in charge of music at One Extra, we were the only station to tip him for big things in 2010, going into 2011. And I playlisted his song with JME called Radio. And what makes me smile is to this day, every time I bump into Ed or we sort of see each other, he always reminds me of that. So that's definitely a highlight. And then just like the random moments that you have where you're like, you're backstage at an event or you're somewhere and you bump into someone and you just have these really surreal exchanges. Do you know what I'm saying? Like I was flown to Wyoming back in 2018 by Kanye West's record label to go and meet him and his team and to listen to his new album. I think it was the Yay album at the time. and we got taken from like a private airfield to New York. Then we had to switch planes. We switched planes. We landed in this crazy little airstrip in Wyoming, and we went to Kanye West's ranch with like him, Kim Kardashian. Do you know what I mean? Like all of like him and his friends and family, and just those crazy surreal moments where you're around the fireplace with Kim Kardashian and Kanye West toasting marshmallows, listening to his album. Like, it sounds kind of nuts saying it now, but yeah, those kind of moments. But if I was to boil it down, honestly, it's just the moments when you see a young 17-year-old kid come in, and you know that music might be their only escape or their only route out of stuff that's going on at home or stuff that's going on in their own head, and you watch them grow and become a butterfly out of the cocoon, man. That's what really gives me pleasure.
Thank you for like sharing some of those moments with us and showing us the trophy as well. It's great to kind of see a little bit there that goes along with what you're telling us. So really awesome for that one. And crazy, definitely some surreal stuff there that we probably weren't expecting. I can't imagine what it would have been like to eat marshmallows with Kanye West and Kim Kardashian, that's for sure. So our next question dives a little bit into social media and the music industry. So it's very clear that social media is big now, and obviously it's developed huge from when you first started. But how much impact does social media have on the music industry? And do you need to be big on social media to make it?
So I think that there's people have always shared music, and we as humans always find the most efficient way to share music, right? So if you go back sort of 500 years, people would share music by just verbally talking about music to each other. And then, if you fast forward another couple of hundred years, when the newspaper was invented, people would share music via kind of, written text and newspapers and magazines. And then, back in the 1920s and 30s and 40s, then people would share music by sort of swapping vinyls with each other or making telephone calls. So like we've always had kind of social media, do you know what I mean? We've always found ways to share music. So the music industry relies on people using technology to magnify music to their friends, to their family, and to the rest of the world. So social media is very important in the music industry. It's one of the ways in which we're able to get the conversation going around music. Do you need to be big on social media to make it in the music industry? I think that there are some really good examples of artists that aren't on social media every single day, but have really successful careers. But what I would say is you don't have to be big on social media or be on social media every day, but people need to be talking about your music on social media every single day to truly like cut through and have scale. So you can look at someone like Stormzy, for example, and Stormzy's been off social media for almost 2 years now. I think it's been, he's not been on Instagram, he's not been on Twitter for almost 2 years now. But he's able to, via him and the work that him and his team do and just how amazing he is as an icon, he's able to have people still talking about him and his music, even though he's not on social media. And then you can look at Atlantic Records as well, and you can look at some of the artists that we have on the books. Someone like Mahalia is a great example of sometimes she's on social media and she's really engaged, and sometimes she's more withdrawn on social media, but people still talk about her music because it's so good. So yeah, I don't think you have to be on social media all the time, but you have to try and find ways to get people to talk about your music on social media.
Thank you for that, answering that one. I think it can be difficult sometimes that there's this sort of idea that you have to be big and you have to make it and there's no other way, because that's kind of all we see nowadays when we're like on the platforms. So great to get your opinion on that one. Our next question is about demystifying different concepts. So what are some of the misconceptions about working in the music industry that people have, and what would you say to demystify these conceptions?
that everybody is, you know, rich and happy and having the time of their lives. That's probably, you know, one of the biggest myths on the music industry. The music industry is just like any other industry. Working in music is no different to working for your local council or working in the food industry. Back to my days when I was working at Sainsbury's, there were some things that I really liked about my job. There were some things that were annoying about my job. There were some days where things went wrong and you had to fix things. Do you know what I mean? Like the music industry is exactly the same as when I was working in Sainsbury's. It's just the problems are more public now, and they're bigger problems that you're dealing with now. Instead of when I was at Sainsbury's, instead of worrying that like a bottle of alcohol would get stolen, you're worrying that like the new Ed Sheeran album's going to get stolen. Do you know what I'm saying? So it's like the problems are bigger. That's all I'd say on that. And then what are the other myths about the industry? Maybe I hear a lot of young people sometimes think that like the music industry, the record labels like control what's going to be big and what's not. And the truth is the public control what's going to be big and what's not. And what we as a record label and as a music industry are quite good at is identifying and second guessing what the public are going to do. But we can't control what's going to be a hit or what's not going to be. You know, record labels every single year sign dozens of artists that don't ever make it. So yeah, so there's that. What else? I don't know. What have you heard, Charlie, about the music industry? What myths have you heard about the music industry?
I feel like the first one is definitely like it's money, and you know, that's probably the biggest one, I guess, is that you've got to, probably the main one is you have to know, do you have to know someone to get in? Do you have to have an in, or can you not know anybody and still make it? Like that's quite a big one. I don't know if that's true or not.
So, I mean, you can definitely get into the music industry without knowing people from the start. But at some point you have to build relationships, and those relationships are going to help you get in, right? So I gave an example of I had zero formal music industry experience. I knew nobody in the music industry, not one single person, when I was 16. But because I was going to events, I was stalking people online at the time, you know, during the sort of super early days of social media, so like MySpace and just before MySpace days. By the time I got into the music industry, I had made like 5, 10, 15 friends. So you definitely don't need to know someone when you're starting that journey. But if you're serious about getting in, then you have to learn how to build effective relationships. So it's no different to being at school or college, right? You might start in year 7 or start in year 12 and you're in a new college or a new school and you don't know anybody whatsoever. And that's cool. You can go through the whole of your school life or college life not speaking or knowing anyone. But the reality is, if you really want to have the most fulfilling time possible, then ideally you would learn how to build relationships with your classmates and, you know what I mean, your colleagues, etc. So it's a similar kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest one that I always think is you always hear like, oh, you can't get in without knowing someone. So definitely for me, that was like the most well-known misconception. So yeah, great to hear that. Our next question is, obviously you've been in the music industry for years and you've seen it changed and you were there, you know, before social media and things like that. So, you know, in your experience, how has the music industry changed over the years since you started? And as a second part, are there any roles that exist now that didn't when you started?
So answering the first part of your question, the second part of your question first. Yeah, there are loads of roles that didn't exist when I first started. You know, head of TikTok didn't exist when I started. You can look at any. So I joined the BBC in October 2005. So I joined, I think, a year after Facebook launched and a year before YouTube launched. And you know, it's crazy to say that now. But I think you can look at any of the platforms that have launched since I joined the industry. So you can look at YouTube, you can look at Twitter, you can look at Instagram, you can look at TikTok, you can look at Patreon, you can look at OnlyFans, you can look at all of these different platforms, Discord, Reddit, Twitch, and none of those jobs existed, or jobs relating to those companies. None of them existed in the music industry before I joined. So, you know, head of YouTube, head of creator, head of TikTok, being a head of influencer strategy. You know, there was no such thing as an official influencer, like an Instagram influencer, when I first joined the industry. So yeah, man, like, you know, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of jobs that now exist that didn't exist when I joined. And it's great because it means that there are more opportunities. When I first joined the industry, the lane was that narrow in terms of, like, if I don't get into one extra, where else can I go to work in black music? Maybe MTV, and that's it. It was either one extra, capital extra, at the time it was called Choice FM, or MTV. And if it wasn't one of those three, then that was it. You know, you're kind of messed up. Whereas now, if you're a fan of black music, there are 100 different places that you can go and work: GRM Daily, Link Up TV, SBTV, etc. Mixtape Madness. If you're into dance music, then you can go and work at SoundCloud. You know, you can go and work at, you know, Beatport. Like, there are so many different things that didn't, maybe Beatport did exist when I first joined, but, you know, certainly others didn't. So it's great that we have now got so many different places and avenues for young people to go down. And then in terms of how it's changed, I don't really think the day-to-day concept of what the music industry about has changed. It's a group of misfits and weirdos that are passionate about music, and I call myself a misfit and a weirdo, just to be clear. We love misfits and weirdos, who are really passionate about music, waking up in the morning trying to magnify that music to the world. It kind of goes back to the very first question that I answered, where it's like, you know what, day to day, my job is waking up in the music and debating with people, you know, about it. So I don't really think a huge amount has changed. And sometimes we like to think that things have changed massively because of all of the technology that's around us. But, you know, in reality, you know, the sort of the human experience is the same, is what I'd say.
I definitely think you've changed my way of thinking. I never really thought about that before. So it's really interesting to kind of, you know, hear from like an expert like yourself and to start thinking that way. Because you do think that it just has changed drastically, but I guess it really hasn't, which is just super interesting. So you've made me think differently today. So hopefully our young people have also changed a little bit about how they see that as well in the music industry, which is really cool. Leading on to the next question, you know, those in the music industry seem to often face rejection, and it can be quite difficult to get into sometimes, although of course we do have a lot more opportunities now than we did when you first started. Is this a true statement? Is that idea true? And how do you keep building resilience when you do get rejected to keep going?
I'm really glad that you've asked that question, because rejection is part of the human experience, and rejection is really important in building resilience. And in the same way that a baby builds resilience from catching a cold or falling down and getting back up again, it's really important to understand that every single person in any powerful or influential position in the world is still facing rejection or loss every single day. So even the biggest artists in the world don't always go to #1, right? You know, even Drake, Ed Sheeran, Adele, Dua Lipa, like the biggest artists in the world, they don't put out every single song and it goes to #1. So dealing with failure, whether it be a small amount of failure or a large amount of failure, is mad important. And what you have to understand is, working in the music industry, is working in an excellence field. So getting a job in the music industry and working for a major label or a big streaming service like Spotify or Apple Music or YouTube, that's like joining Manchester United or Real Madrid. It's like working for Nike or Adidas. It's like getting into the Olympics. Just, you might be the fastest person in your school. You might be the fastest person in your county. You might even be the fastest person in your country, but you still don't make it to the Olympics because you finished 0.1 second behind someone else. And when you're working in an excellence field, the difference between first place and last place is often 1 second. Think about the 100-meter finals of the Olympics. The person who finishes the gold medal at 9.5 something seconds, and the person who goes home embarrassed and rejected because they finished last, finished 1 second behind the person who finished first and got the glory. So I really need everyone who's watching this today to remember the music industry is an excellence field, and you will face dozens, if not hundreds, of rejection emails. People are not going to get back to you. People are going to be, in some cases, rude and dismissive. People are going to keep you waiting and sell you a dream. It happens, and it happens all around the world, no matter what country you're trying to get into the music industry. My own experience is when I was trying to get into the industry and I was applying for jobs, I must have applied for probably between 300 and 400 jobs I applied for. I would say 3/4 of those didn't even get back to me. I would say out of those sort of 100 or so that were left, maybe about 50 of them did get back to me saying that they weren't, there was nothing for me. I would say probably 30 of them said, your CV looks good, your experience looks cool, we'll be in touch, and they never got in touch. And then there was maybe sort of 20 out of those 400 that took me seriously. But even then, it was only one person or one company that actually offered me the job. So don't be disheartened, don't be disheartened. Yeah, it's the music industry is just is a place that is so alluring that there are thousands of people trying to get into it, and there are only a few hundred spaces each year or each couple of years, so it's like trying to get into a top university, I suppose, or something like that. Maybe not as elitist as that actually, but it's like trying to get into a top sports team. It's difficult, it's tough, and the competition's mad.
I think that was a great one to kind of end our formal interview on. A really nice note to leave that on, and we're going to move on to our student Q&A, and we have had lots of questions pre-submitted from the students listening, so I'm kind of go through them and ask you a couple of them, because it's very clear there's some certain topics that people are really interested in and want to kind of pick your brain a little bit with. So one that was quite popular, we had several people ask this sort of similar question, which is around travel and music. So can you travel with a music career, and does it lead to a lot of traveling?
Depending on where you work, it can definitely lead to a lot of traveling. When I was at the BBC, it was all about what was happening in the UK. So at the start of my career, I was really lucky to travel all across the UK. I went to Scotland, I went to Wales, I went to more or less every single major city in the UK, Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, Bristol, Southampton. Like, I literally went all over the country, and that was an incredible experience during the start of my career. So yeah, if you're working for a company whose main business is in the UK, then you'll get to travel across the UK. And like I said, that was almost as exciting as traveling internationally sometimes. When I started working for companies that had more of a global outlook, so if you join a company like Netflix or Spotify or Warner or Sony or Universal, where they've got a global outlook on things, then yeah, you're sometimes lucky enough to travel. When I was at Spotify, I was super lucky. I got to go to New York, LA, Atlanta, Texas. I got to go to Sweden, Mexico. I got to go travel all over the world. I've been super lucky in my jobs, but because I've had jobs that have needed travel. So yeah, you can sometimes get to travel, But sometimes the traveling experience, going back to like the glitz and glamour of the music industry, sometimes the traveling experience is really like, wow, like I can't believe that I'm like here, I'm at the Grammy Awards, or, you know, I'm at this particular event and it looks incredible and I'm here around all superstars. Yeah, sometimes that can be cool, but sometimes you might go to a country. Like there were times when I would go to New York, I'd get off the plane, I'd get in an Uber, the Uber would take me to the hotel, I'd be based in the hotel for 3 days, not see any sunlight because I'm just doing meetings, and then get in an Uber back to the airport and back to London. So sometimes you reel off the list of names of countries that you've traveled in, and it's like, oh, that sounds mad, like impressive. You've been to all these countries, but actually half of them, I just saw the inside of a hotel room, and I didn't actually see the country. So it's not always glitz and glamour, but you definitely do get to travel a lot if you're in the right company.
Great, fab. Next one is, how do you plan for a career in music from GCSE? So like you finished school sort of thing. Where do you go from there? And what sort of salary can you expect to start on when you do enter the music industry?
So I don't know if you can plan for a job in the music industry from the age of 16, and I certainly didn't. I certainly just freestyled it and freeballed it, you know, and then just sort of found my way in. So I would say that the common theme amongst people that join the music industry, and I'm talking about, I suppose, the more creative side of the music industry, because if you want to be a music lawyer, for example, then of course there's a very structured way in which, you know, you need to go to university, you need to get your law degree, and then you'll need to join a firm. So there are some, if you're working on the accountancy or legal side of the business, then some of you guys might be, obviously that is quite structured. But I'm going to talk about the creative side because that's the side that I came up through. The thing that tends to be consistent amongst anyone who's worked on the marketing or music side of the business is informal experience. They helped out a mate. They were working in a studio, running around doing coffees, acting as a runner. Do you know what I mean? They were doing all this informal stuff. So what I would say is, if you finish your GCSEs, try and find an informal bit of work experience where maybe they just pay for your expenses or something like that. You can Google Music Studios London, or wherever you're dialing in from, Music Studios Birmingham, Music Studios Exeter, and just ring up, pick up the phone and say, oh, hi, my name is X. I really want to work in music. Can I do some work experience at your studio? And you'll be surprised. So many people are used to getting emails. You'll be surprised at what a good telephone manner can do. And you'll be surprised how far you can get just by picking up the phone and having a conversation with someone. So yeah, that's what I'd say. Build up as much experience as possible.
Great. So this next one's probably a quick one. I think you've kind of already answered it. I'm going to ask it, which is, for your role, you know, big role, vice president, do you need any qualifications for that role? Or is it all about that kind of learned experience?
So no, I mean, you don't need any formal qualifications per se in my role. At my level, there is certain training that you have to do to ensure that, you know, you're fit for purpose as an executive to lead. So like there may be some anti-harassment or anti-bullying or diversity training that, you know, we have to do to make sure that we stay up to date with being an inclusive place to work and being inclusive leaders. But in terms of like GCSEs, degrees, A levels, you know, I did good in my GCSEs, I did all right in my A levels, and I dropped out of uni after 6 months. So I sort of don't have any I suppose I don't have any qualifications that like fully correlate to what I'm doing now. With that being said, you know, do I use some of the lessons that I learned in English and maths now? Yeah, a little bit actually. But yeah, you don't need any qualifications.
Our next one is, what is a typical working day / week for you in your music career?
That's a good question. I'm going to open up my diary and show you guys like what a typical working week looks like. So what I'm going to do is I'm gonna actually fast forward to like August. So can I share my screen? Am I able to share my screen?
Yep, you should be able to share your screen.
All right, I'm gonna try and share my calendar. Can you see that, Charlie?
Yep, we can see that.
Right. So this is like a typical week. This is my week this week. And as you can see, it's just lots of blocks, lots of meetings and lots of stuff going on. So my week so far has been a pre-label. Let me just increase this so you guys can see it. There's nothing confidential on here, so it's all good. So we have a pre-label meeting at 9 o'clock or 9:15 on a Monday. And the pre-label meeting is where me and my two presidents, the co-presidents of the record label, we sit down and we work out the agenda for the label meeting. That's what we do. And then at 10 o'clock, we have the label meeting where all 50 staff from Atlantic Records all get together and we talk through all of the latest projects. So we'll talk through Burna Boy's album campaign, Lizzo's album that came out this week, Ed Sheeran, Jack Harlow, Cardi B, Tion Wayne, all of the projects that we're talking about or that are out in the market, we are giving updates to the whole label to set the tone for the week. Then I had a catch-up chat with a member of staff. And then this is rare for me, 2.5 hours free time to get some emails out of the way. And then this meeting here is called New Music Meeting, session 1. So this is where the A&Rs, so the people that find the music and sign the music, we all get together and all of the A&Rs bring music to the table and they play music to the rest of the team. So an example would be, hey guys, I've just found this hot new singer. She sounds amazing. She looks great. And I really think she could be a star. She's got, a song out at the moment. Check this out. They'll play the video, they'll play the song, and then we'll then all talk about it and decide whether we want to take it forward to the next meeting or not. And then we then had a business development meeting yesterday. And business development is how we can develop Atlantic Records as a business. Don't worry, guys, I'm not going to take you through every single meeting across the week. I'm just going to give you a flavour. The business development meeting is basically where, how can we improve the business? How can we improve process? How can we improve structure? How can we improve the way that we present ourselves to the world? I then had a KSI catch up. Atlantic Records have partnered with KSI. That actually isn't public information yet. So if you keep that to yourselves, I'd appreciate that. But yeah, we had a catch up about KSI because we are, we're going to be putting out some music with him soon. So we had a catch up with KSI, and that is an average Monday, basically. Right now, obviously, I'm giving my talk, my Speakers for Schools broadcast talk. And then straight after this, I've got what's called a weekly streaming strategy talk where me and the streaming team sit down and we talk about what's going on at Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, etc. So that's it. That's like there's no secret meat stuff that goes on. It's just kind of everyday stuff. Sometimes you might see some really cool things in my diary. You might see that I'm going to meet an artist, or a couple of weeks ago I got to go to there was a DJ that was playing at a football event and I got to go there. So sometimes you might see the odd cool thing, but quite often it's just meetings with me to just sat down chewing the fat with people. So that's a typical working day and what my working week looks like.
Thank you for that one. I think it's so great. You're clearly so open that you just brought up your calendar there, and I love that. We are coming to like the end of the session, and I think that was like such an awesome way to just kind of finish it off as a last question. Do you have like any thoughts or feelings that you would like to leave our young people with before we kind of wrap up with the end of the session?
I would say that there are some common themes that I see amongst young people that go on to be successful. They are polite, they turn up on time, they do the basics well, they've got an attention to detail, they're fearless, and they're not afraid to ask questions and say it as it is. And it's really, really important that any young person that's watching this today, no matter where you're from, no matter your gender, your sexual orientation, your socioeconomic background, that you continue to be fearless and you don't lose the inquisitive nature that all young people have. Because any young person that I've seen grow up and blossom, and I include myself in that, you know, we've done the basics well. And that's all I'd say.